Hello everyone, Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club here. And the three most important things that you need to study and practice and review over and over again are tactics, tactics, and tactics. We're going to begin a series here on tactics, and we're going to start with the fork. Now, it's been said that tactics are 99% of chess. I think that's just a hyperbole to tell us just how important tactics are. It's especially important in amateur games because typically the more stronger tactical player is going to win the game. Each side will make mistakes or miss possible wins, but whoever has the stronger tactic ability will get an advantage and move forward. As your play increases, that's when you really want to know your end games and your openings and all of those things. I do encourage you to check out our Attacking the King series for all the different checkmate patterns that are available. But let's go ahead and begin our series on tactics with the fork. Now, the fork is simply a double attack where one piece is attacking two pieces. Here we're going to use the knight as an example because the knight's primary use is in forks. And what we're going to notice is this square here that the knight can move to. And he's going to be forking, when it's his turn to move, the king and the queen. As you can see, he's got his 2 squares by 1 square and his 2 squares by 1 square. If you don't know how the pieces move, definitely check out the videos on that. But we can see that the king and the queen are both attacked here. So black has to save his king, must move out of check, and then the knight gobbles up the queen. So we can back that up and we can look from a distance, noticing the opportunity for the knight to fork both the king and the queen and winning a piece. The reason the fork is so deadly is that each side only gets to move one piece at a time. So white makes a move, now it's black's turn to move. He can't move both pieces before it's white's turn, so he has to choose one to save and one to lose. And of course, by rule, we have to get out of check. So the queen is going to fall. Let's look at a few other pieces that can also cause a fork. The bishop has multiple tactics available to it, but the fork is one of them. Can you find the square where the bishop can move and attack two pieces at the same time? There it is. We're attacking the king and the rook at the same time. Once the king moves to safety, the bishop gets the rook. So you can see how powerful of a tactic that the fork is. We can see how rooks might be able to cause a fork. Hopefully you can quickly see where the rook needs to move to fork both the king and the queen. And here, because one rook protects the other, when the queen takes the king, or excuse me, takes the rook, the next rook captures the queen and delivers checkmate. And so this is a basic back rank or corridor or edge of board mate. We do have a video on that style of mate patterns. Definitely check that out in our checkmate pattern series. The queen can also cause forks, and we really like the queen because she moves in a lot of different directions. Remember that the queen not only moves forward and backward or side to side, but she can also move diagonally, allowing her to cover a great number of squares. So her first fork in this position is forking the king and the knight with her sideways and diagonal movement. Once the king makes his only move to safety, look at this, another fork, and she just keeps going, and that's one of the things that makes a queen and her ability to cause forks so deadly and so dangerous. But you know, even the lowly pawn can cause a fork. Go ahead and pause the video for a moment and see if you can find a pawn fork. This pawn fork happens quite often in the opening of a game. It's easily missed by beginners, and here we are. The pawn moves, and notice the pawn is protected by its own pawn and its own knight. And in this position, one of these pieces is going to fall because, again, you only get to move one piece on your turn. So if you move the knight to safety, the bishop is going to fall. If you move the bishop to safety, the knight is going to fall. Oftentimes, when it's a bishop involved, the bishop will simply attack the pawn, capturing it for itself, and deciding if that's the better idea for the position. Now, a huge mistake that black could make here is to simply capture that pawn with this knight. Because now when we recapture, we have another pawn fork, and that pawn is defended by this knight. So if the bishop were to take, you can see that White gobbled up quite a bit of material here. If we take a look, we make a threat. So white loses a pawn, but black loses a knight. White loses a pawn, but black loses a bishop. 2 pawns for 2 pieces. So the pawn fork is very, very powerful, and you have to watch out for it. Let's take a look at a couple of short quizzes. This one is a basic quiz, seeing if you can find the fork and how to make it happen in a game. Now, it is white's turn to move here, and again, you're more than welcome to pause the video, see what you can figure out and calculate on your own, then hit play and see if you were correct. One of the things we want to notice is that this knight is staring at a square that would allow it to fork both the king and the queen. And given the opportunity, we would gladly trade a knight for a queen. The only problem with this position is that black's knight is covering this square. So we're going to use another tactic that we'll talk about in depth in another video called remove the defender. So if this knight is defending this square from the coming fork from the knight, then all we have to do is remove the defender. So our rook takes the knight. After pawn takes, we're down the exchange. We've given up a powerful rook for a lowly knight, a 5-point major piece for a 3-point minor piece. However, that allows our knight to come in and get the queen. So if we take a look at this position before it started, we can count the pieces and see that white is down in material here. We only have a queen, rook, and knight. Queen, rook, and knight. That means that black has an entire rook advantage on us. But look what happens when we make these trades. We trade off these 2 pieces, allowing us the powerful fork. And now it's a queen against 2 rooks. And that's a lot more even. The queen being 9 points, each rook being 5, so that's 10 points. This is a much more balanced position where both sides have an opportunity to win. Well, let's look at that same setup, but now from black's perspective, and it's black's turn to move. Hopefully you can quickly see the available fork for black. Black really wants to jump into the f3 square. Notice the threats that it's making. However, it is defended by white's knight. So again, we can calculate whether or not removing that defender works out to our advantage. And hopefully, if you take the time to look at it, you'll notice that black could do a very violent move. Anytime we sacrifice a huge sacrifice, it's called a violent move. Sacrificing the queen for the knight. Successfully removing the defender of the f3 square. And take a look at that. A family fork, a triple fork. Black can take whatever he wants. After the king gets to safety, we take the queen. Notice the resulting position of 2 rooks and a knight versus 1 rook. When it first started out, it was a little bit more balanced, but it ended up being pretty ugly. All right, look at another great example here. Here we're going to use one fork after another. See if you can find the first fork and then the second fork. For those of you coming back from a paused video, I hope you found pawn fork on both the king and the queen. Now the queen does not want to try and take this pawn simply because she would be taken by a rook, and we would gladly trade a rook and a pawn for a queen. So instead, bishop takes. Where's the second fork? Knight, again, forking the king and the queen. And here the king has to get to safety. We get the queen, they get the knight. So if we back that up, what you're going to notice is we're simply trading this knight and that pawn for this queen. A 3-point knight, a 1-point pawn, it's 4 points for a 9-point queen. That is a trade we would like to make every chance we could get. Okay, so now let's look at a really advanced example, and this will be our last example on forks today. And this is more likely what could happen in a game. You have a very active situation. Both sides have a lot of ideas, and we're trying to find a way to break through. You'll find yourself in the middle game asking, man, I don't know what to do here. What are my options? Look for opportunities for forks. I hope you notice the threat that if the knight were to take this pawn, he would have a beautiful fork against an undefended king and an undefended queen. The problem is that this pawn is defended twice. It's defended twice by its own pawn and its own bishop. So we would have to take a long think here to find some ideas and calculate what the end result would be before making a decision. Now, if you're playing in a tournament game, typical time controls are each person has 90 minutes, plus you gain 30 seconds back every time you finish a move. And so if an average game is 40 moves, you're going to gain back 20 minutes on your time. So your chess game could easily go 3, if not 4 hours. I had one go 4.5 hours once. So take the time. Matter of fact, pause this video for 10 minutes like you're in a chess tournament and ask yourself all the things you could do to remove this pawn and remove this bishop from protecting this pawn so that your knight could jump in, causing this beautiful fork, and see if you can figure out the end result before you make the moves. Okay, so here's the first move. Bishop captures. And the idea is the bishop is attacking this now undefended rook, which is double attacked by the queen and the bishop. And the queen now has a discovered attack against this king. We're exposing the king to attacks. So black really has no choice here but to recapture with this pawn. So we've given up a bishop for a pawn. We're down 2 points. But notice that defender has been removed. Okay? Queen sacrifice, a very violent move. Queen sacrificing herself for a pawn. And of course, this undefended bishop is under attack. So black needs to accept that sacrifice. So now if you're keeping score, so far, white has given up a bishop and given up a queen. That's 12 points and has only gained 2 pawns. However, now these defenders have been removed and it's time for white to strike with the royal fork, regaining the bishop. And once the king moves, regaining the queen. So the end result is that white has an extra 2 pawns because black lost 2 pawns and a queen and a bishop, while white only lost the queen and the bishop. We can back it up and you can count it. Before everything happened, black had 6 pawns. Okay. After we make our moves, capturing those 2 pawns, giving up our 2 pieces, but then with this fork regaining those 2 pieces, now black only has 4 pawns. And you'll notice the pieces that went away. We gave up a bishop and a queen, but then we gained the bishop and the queen. So at the end of this entire sequence, white is up or ahead 2 pawns. And so the beauty of it was we removed a defender, we removed another defender, allowing us to get this fork. And we wouldn't have found it if at first we weren't just looking for opportunities. And the opportunity we saw was that there was a fork available. And then you go, well, what can I do with that? Well, hopefully this gives you an idea of what a fork is and how you might use it in a game. And I encourage you to watch and follow us on continuing the series on tactics, where we'll talk about pins, skewers, decoys, deflections, all kinds of wonderful tactics. Please follow us on Facebook at Hood County Chess Club. Click the like button to keep up with local events. And remember, you are what you repeat. Practice these positions over the board with a friend until they become a part of your next game.